As you might agree, literature has a unique way of nourishing the soul. Sadly, there's rarely enough time or energy to indulge in it. And when we finally do crack open a book, there's that satisfying feeling of being someone who knows a thing or two. It was exactly that sensation I had one October day. But that book, well, that's what eventually set the stage for my separation from my wife. This year, I found myself on a break in the middle of a grey, drizzly October. Honestly, I wasn't thrilled about it. The summer had already waved its goodbye, and it was far too gloomy to consider a getaway. My wife, however, had already taken her vacation in July, so I was left with the luxury of solitude. Naturally, I decided to spend one of my days exploring a nearby bookstore. I ended up picking a small book, How My Wife Spent This Summer. The title instantly caught my eye. It somehow felt prophetic. You know that comforting scent of a fresh book? The one that seems to echo the feeling of freshly pressed paper. Yeah, I loved it. By the end of the first day, I had read 2 chapters. It was a story about Eleanor and her friend Valerie, who went to the seaside, while Eleanor's husband, Victor, stayed at home. He couldn't take time off from work. The setting was the seaside, a place I had never been to, but for some reason seemed to know too well. Eleanor, much to my surprise, didn't bring her son along. She justified it by saying that he wouldn't enjoy the company of his mother and friend. He'd probably get along better with his father. I had to laugh because, of course, there were so many similarities to my own life. Jessica, my wife, had left Paul with me for the very same reason. Later, when Jessica came back from work, she was eager to tell me about this little book she had picked up. She mentioned how funny it was, so I shared my experience with her too. I laughed, pointing out all the strange coincidences between the plot and our life. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a joke to her, not in the slightest. She looked at me and said, "Nick, it's just crappy tabloid fiction. Do you really think you're that shallow?" I retorted, "I just wanted to cheer myself up a little bit." On the second day, I had already read 4 chapters. The story took an interesting turn. Leonora began to write heartfelt letters to Victor, in which she claimed how much she missed him, how she missed her husband while she was on the beach, even though she had a friend with her. But what's so special about that? She sent him some hilarious photos, one of which, rather ominously, showed her next to a man. Victor didn't bother confronting her directly. Instead, he tracked down Valerie on social media and sent her the photo with a simple question. "Who's this guy?" To his shock, she had no clue who the man was, and as it turned out, she hadn't even gone to the seaside. It all seemed absurdly humorous, if only it didn't carry such an air of sadness. I couldn't help but remember the time Jessica had done something very similar. She had accidentally sent me a photo like that. But unlike Victor, I didn't just stew in confusion. I went straight to my wife with a question. "Who's this guy?" Her response was, "Well, not perfect, but understandable, although I didn't like it." She explained that a young man approached her on the beach and asked her to take a picture with him, claiming that he was trying to prove to his friends that he could take 10 such pictures during his vacation. At that time, I didn't really hide my disappointment. I met her at the airport after her trip and grumbled, so if he had offered something else, like, I don't know, going to bed with you, would you have agreed to that? Her response was, shall we say, not exactly what I wanted to hear. She gave me this little lecture, as though I were the one being unreasonable. "Nick, stop being a Neanderthal. There are limits to everything. If you were truly jealous, you'd be punching me at work and demanding that I take the next summer vacation with you." I didn't discuss the plot of the book with Jessica that night. I began to feel a strange sense of unease, and the next day, these doubts only intensified. So I did something that I probably shouldn't have done. I decided to call a friend who went to the seaside with Jessica. I came up with a rather formal excuse. Laura worked for the same editorial office that recently published a sensational expose of corruption in the administration. I pretended to have a casual conversation about a vacation by the sea, where, apparently, there were a lot of tourists this year. I haven't been there myself. I spent the summer at home. It quickly became clear from the conversation. My wife had lied to me about her vacation with a friend, and the guy in the photo. Yes, he wasn't just a random person in the background. Everything started to fall apart. I didn't delete the photo from my phone, and after a little digging, I found it again. It was simple enough. I started looking for the guy in the photo on social media. His wife had an open profile, and it didn't take us long to track down a guy named Oliver. If you ask me, it's hard to believe that some random person could make friends with her on social media without any prior connection. When Jessica finally returned home, she was greeted, let's say, warmly. I admit I wasn't completely calm or reasonable. I pressed her until I got all the details out of her. We got divorced. She eventually graduated from her dental practice and married that guy. But what's the twist? He caught her cheating on him too. The difference, however, is that unlike me, Oliver didn't stop with words. He moved on. As a result, Jessica needed a complicated head surgery after their quarrel, and so it was another level of trouble for her. That's the ending.